Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. This is the session on government leadership in delivering the transition. This conference by the Climate Bonds Initiative is focused on green transition. We have a huge job to do to make our economies, our societies sustainable to the benefit of all, which means wealthy, healthy, and inclusive as we do it. We know we need to make investments beyond what we've been looking at in the past. Clean energy, clean transport. We have to tackle the hard sectors. That includes industrial transition. And it does include urban development and how we make sure our cities can be clean and green going forward. This session has a fantastic lineup of speakers. Before I get to that, a couple of housekeeping issues. There is a question and answer option in the WOVA app or the conference app that participants will be coming through. Please do use it. People will be attempting to answer your questions and a few will be fed up to me to feed into this particular question. There is simultaneous translation available in Chinese, Japanese, Russian, Spanish, and Portuguese. Look for the language button on your window. Everything will be recorded. Sessions will be available a day later. This is for public information. You can tweet, and there is a conference tweet, hashtag CBIConf20. That's the basics. I want to, as I always do, thank the sponsors who have made this conference possible. Without them, we are nothing. They're all organizations that are committed to financing and working on the financing of the transition in one form or another, whether they're an investor like Amundi Asset Management or an investment bank like BNP Paribas. So thank you HSBC, Goldman Sachs, Refinitiv, JP Morgan Indices, Credit Suisse, and the Luxembourg Green Exchange. And our other sponsors too, from the Green Finance Center in Kazakhstan to Mizuho, BBVA, Allianz Bernstein, Invesco, Moody's, and Lixor. We can't do this without you. We are incredibly grateful for your continued support for this and the broader market. On this session, we have Fiona Reynolds, who's the CEO of the Principles for Responsible Investment, which is an organization representing the bulk of the world's institutional investors. She'll give us more details, but this is way above the GDP size of any economy in the world. Over $80 trillion of assets under management represented last time I looked, and Fiona will no doubt have an update on that. We then have Martin Spolc, who is the head of sustainable finance for the European Commission's Director General for Financial Stability, Financial Services and Capital Markets Union. We do have a bit of a proclivity in Europe for long titles, but Martin will talk about the incredible work under that title he's been doing and the Commission and European member states have been doing on transition plans. We will then actually go to His Excellency, Mr. Babajide Olusola Sanwo-lu, who is the governor of Lagos State in Nigeria, who manages a state with a city of 20 million people in it, predicted by some to be the city of 100 million by the end of the century. If ever a city has transition challenges, it's Lagos. We will have Hiromichi Mizuno, who's the special advisor to Japan's Ministry for Economy, Trade and Industry, and TCFD, Task Force for Climate Finance Related Disclosure. And METI put out the very first government guidelines about those. He's also the former Chief Investment Officer of the world's largest pension fund, GPIF. Finally, Valvanera Aparicio, the Director General for the Climate Change Office in Spain, will represent the Spanish government's review. Unfortunately, Teresa Ribera, the minister, has been called away to a cabinet meeting. And so Valvanera has kindly stepped in at the last minute. Thanks, folks, for joining us today. That's it. I now want to turn to Fiona to kick us off. Over to you, Fiona.
Well, thanks, Sean, and congratulations on a fantastic conference so far. I hope everyone's safe and well. Let me start by saying, in talking about the transition, that along with COVID-19, really climate and the transition to a zero carbon economy tops the investor agenda. And you mentioned in your introduction that PERI had a very large signatory base. So we have 3,000 signatories who represent over 100 trillion in assets under management US. Investors are, of course, critical to the transition. In fact, I really believe that without the finance sector, we'll not solve climate change, and the transition simply won't happen with the urgency that it's required. So within our signatory base, the investors are really working across 4 key areas: corporate engagement, investment, so the investments they do and don't make, including into new technologies and energy sources, disclosure, and then policy and advocacy with governments. And I want to touch briefly on each of these areas. So if I start with corporate engagement, obviously one of the key levers that we have as investors is our role as major shareholders. So we have leverage and we need to use it. So just under 3 years ago, we formed with other investor groups Climate Action 100+. So it's the largest ever corporate to investor engagement that's ever taken place on any issue. 450 investors, 45 trillion in assets under management, and it targets the largest 100 emitting companies, plus there's another 61 companies that are in sort of hard to abate sectors. And it has 3 main asks. So the first is for companies to set net zero targets for 2050 with measurable targets and milestones, which we benchmark the companies against. We then have, part of our ask and understanding is around governance. So we want to know what actions a board's taking. When they're sitting around that table, what are they thinking? How are they planning the transition in their organisation? And then we ask for disclosure in line with the TCFD so that investors themselves have the information they need to really understand what actions companies are taking to address the transition. And this engagement is really starting to have cut through and success. So if I just quickly mention a few recent successes as a direct result of Climate Action 100+. So if we think about BP's recent update on its net zero ambition, it is the most advanced and ambitious transition plan from an oil and gas company to date. Yes, it might not be perfect, but it does set out a more comprehensive medium-term plan to 2030, including a 10 times increase in low carbon investment, 40% production decline, no exploration in new countries, emissions reductions of 30 to 35% in operations, 35 to 40% from upstream production, and 15% in carbon intensity from products. Has a 17.5 billion asset write-down, in part due to climate change, and it follows similar write-downs from Shell and Total. So Climate Action 100+ is engaging with those very large corporations, but it's not just in developed countries, this is global. So Resilience Industries in India recently announced that it's to become net zero by 2035. And although there's still lots of details and some things are still lacking, it's one of the first formal net zero commitments from a major Asian company targeted by Climate Action 100+. And in its announcements, Resilience said it plans to replace transportation fuels with clean electricity and hydrogen, that it has proprietary technology to convert transportation fuels to valuable petrochemical and material building blocks. And just to note that we've also just added Pemex, the Mexican national oil company, which is 100% state-owned, to our focus list of Climate Action 100+ companies. And this really shows the growing appetite from bondholders in addition to equity shareholders to engage on climate action. So more energy-intensive companies are making commitments to net zero. The trend is spreading, particularly in Europe, but it's not limited to Europe. Then on the investment side, investors are not just asking companies to set net zero targets. In September at the UN Secretary General's Climate Summit with UNFFI, we launched the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, or AOA for short. And we have over 30, or well, we have just under 30 asset owners who've committed to net zero across their entire portfolio by 2050. And this includes some of the largest investors in the world. So it includes Allianz and AXA, for example. And this is really groundbreaking work. It hasn't been done before. So currently the AOA members are road testing the decarbonisation of their individual investment portfolios for a midterm target for 2025. And the target setting framework and the AOA decarbonisation range, which is an absolute emissions reduction in percentage of the investment portfolio, will be out for public consultation in October. And then individual asset owner targets will be published in the first quarter of 2021. So it's not just about the 2050 target that people might think is the never, never. It's also about what are the nearer term targets and how do we get there. With under the Asset Owner Alliance, we also have a financing the transition track. So we've just kicked off really this track in July, and we're finalising our first strategy paper, but we really aim to identify the investments that need to be made in climate solutions and then start discussions with DFIs, asset managers, etc. about how that finance can happen. Then if I move quickly to climate reporting and disclosure, at the PRI, for our part, we're really looking to increase the investor accountability about what it means to be a signatory to the PRI. This includes a streamlined but more stretching reporting requirement, which comes into play from January next year, when we'll make it mandatory to report and disclose against TCFD-based governance and strategy questions. We'll also introduce reporting on sustainability outcomes. So not just about process, also about what are the outcomes of your investments. This year, we had a threefold increase in investor climate reporting to the PRI in the first quarter of 2020. This is primarily a result of us starting to make climate reporting mandatory to report. At the moment, it's still voluntary to disclose, but that will change. Yet although it's increasing, I do have to say that that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a signal in investment practice. Many investors are still at the start of the journey with TCFD, and in some analysis that we did, that we really sort of put investors in a staircase about the quality of the reporting that they've done to us. Only 2% who reported were at our top level. So reporting's one thing, but quality of actions is another. So a move to mandatory reporting and disclosure for all PRI signatories over the next few years. And then if we come to the final lever, investors are also engaging with governments across the globe. As despite all the work that I've outlined, it's pretty difficult to say that as an investor you can get to net zero across your entire portfolio without obviously changes in companies, but also without changes in government policy settings. And I know that many of you will have heard Mark Fulton speak earlier, and he presented on our inevitable policy response, or IPR work, where we clearly say that the longer the delay in policy action, the more forceful and the more disruptive the policy changes will need to be. And that this will in fact, really impact all of us, but it will in particular impact financial markets. So through our IPR work, we're encouraging investors to act, but also governments to act. And I mean, some are. I'm here in the UK. We have a net zero target. It's the law of the land. That's fantastic. We have a coal phase out date. We have an internal combustion engine phase out. But we need firm policies and really a clear direction from governments around the world if we want private investment to flow. In the work that we've set out, we've talked about the different policy levers that can be pulled, setting a meaningful price on carbon, energy efficiency measures introduced and timelines, including efficiency measures in homes and businesses, changes in agricultural practices, investment in carbon capture and storage, incentives for new energy sectors, nature-based solutions, including reforestation, a date to end fossil fuel subsidies. So just wrapping up, there's far more that needs to be done, but governments need to follow through. They need to follow through on good climate policies to give investors certainty. They also need to follow through, in many cases, on well-intentioned commitments to a green recovery. We need the EU to lead by example, set a 55% emissions reduction target by 2030, use the EU taxonomy to guide recovery spending, and deliver a comprehensive package of policy measures at both the member state and EU level to ensure these targets are met. And then we need other countries and regions to follow suit. So thanks, Sean. Back to you.
Thank you, Fiona, for those stirring words at the end. Martin, I think Fiona has handed the baton to you. Over to you to tell us about the...
Thank you very much, Sean, and many thanks to Fiona for a great introduction. Many thanks, Sean, for accepting me to be at your conference. And by the way, many thanks to you, all your great work, and also PRI great work, major contribution to the European Commission's agenda. You asked me what the role of policymaker in this agenda is, and I would say that there are three. The first one is to bring clarity about the goal, about the target. And as you know, for the European Commission, we have been very clear that the European Green Deal is a priority number one. We have defined quite ambitious targets to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. There are ongoing discussions about the need to increase the target also for 2030, because the current targets simply are not high enough. The second big role for the policy makers is to provide the financial sector and corporates with the right tools and the right frameworks. And we have embarked on a quite ambitious agenda in Europe over the last few years, and I will say a few words about that. And finally, I think that I would like to follow up on what Fiona said. I mean, our role is also to work with the sector itself, not only with the financial sector, but corporate sector, and engage. I always say that the success of this agenda really stands and falls on having a very strong partnership between the public and private sector. And I would like to really comment not only CBI, PRI, but all our other organizations that have contributed to this dialogue. Now, I mentioned that we started to work on this project basically 2.5 years ago. I mean, Sean, you remember you were the godfather of the origin as part of the high-level expert group that recommended a very comprehensive agenda. A very comprehensive agenda to the European Union, and in March 2018, we did indeed presented the first ambitious action plan. The first one is basically to reorient capital flows aggressively towards sustainable investment.
Martin, just give me a tick, Martin. Sorry, we've got a bit of interpreter voice coming from some of us. I don't know if everyone's getting this. A Chinese interpreter is coming across the wrong audio channel. Team, can we just fix that quickly?
Working on that.
Okay, back to you, Martin. Sorry. If we can just close that channel down until we get it fixed, please, Mari, that'd be great.
Yes, can I just ask the Chinese interpreter not to speak right now? Thank you.
Martin, we have a complication. We've got 5 separate languages being simultaneously translated at the moment, and we've got a few teething problems with technology. I'm very sorry to interrupt your flow. Back to you.
No problem. We have 20 languages in the European Union, so I mean, it can get even complicated in Europe. I was just saying that there were basically 3 main objectives of our comprehensive agenda, which is, by the way, very much linked to the transition. The first one is reorient capital flows, so that, you know, the private and public capital flows are oriented more towards sustainable investments. The investment needs that we have estimated are really huge, and, you know, it's clear that the public sector on its own cannot really meet them. The second target is to make sure that the financial sector itself is managing the risks stemming from climate change and environmental degradation, and that it has the right tools. Obviously, we have developed some tools and even legislative action how to do that. And the third objective was to make sure that there is enough transparency, there is sufficient transparency, not only by the financial sector itself, but also by corporates, and that we mainstream sustainability also in corporate governance, and the long-termism agenda is much more prominent in the way how financial sector operates. Now, I will not bother you, with all the details of this ambitious agenda. What I am very proud to say is that we had managed at the European level to agree politically 3 very ambitious legislative proposals. One on taxonomy, I will say a few words about that. The second one on disclosure of financial sector, of financial market participants. And finally, also on climate benchmarks. We have not only focused on legislative actions, we have been working very closely with the industry itself, because this agenda is also an enabling agenda. And Sean, you are again, and PRI and other colleagues have been part of this process. We established a group called Technical Expert Group on Sustainable Finance that assisted the Commission over the last 2 years with 4 major pieces of work. That really has been a groundbreaking piece of work. First, basically developing the first blueprint for taxonomy in the European Union for climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. This work was completed in March. The second major deliverable of this group was a first blueprint of the Green Bond Standard, EU Green Bond Standard, that again can be used not only by the private sector, but also by the public sector. Then the group developed concrete proposals how to incorporate the TCFD recommendations into EU law, and basically bring clarity to corporates what kind of relevant information they should disclose to the financial sector. And finally, the group has assisted the Commission on the technical details of the climate benchmarks. Now, I will not go into the details. I promised to tell you a little bit more about the taxonomy. The taxonomy is obviously a central piece of our agenda. It's really the key tool and the central pillar of the strategy. The taxonomy is a classification system that determines which economic projects, which economic activities substantially contribute to meeting the environmental objectives. It is a basically essential tool that will tell you how much environmental performance is needed to hit the targets. So we are not only talking about making a marginal improvement, we are talking here about making a substantial contribution to meeting the environmental objectives. And the group that we had, and Sean and Nathan, Fabian, who had led all the work, basically developed the first list of these economic activities for climate change adaptation and climate change mitigation that will now be transposed into EU law before the end of the year. It's a groundbreaking work. This tool is essential not only for the private sector, but now in the European Union, and especially in the context of the recovery, we are of course also discussing internally how this tool can be used for the public sector, because there have been a number of public stimulus packages adopted, and we need to make sure that the private sector flows are aligned with the public finance. Now, we are now at a special moment. We have done basically most of the work that was expected from us from the action plan, but we should not be complacent at all. We have to now really scale up the ambition that would be appropriate to the European Green Deal, and also see how the recovery context is changing the landscape for sustainable finance. And however unfortunate the crisis was, I'm really happy to say that in the European Union, the way how we see it is that we don't really see the trade-off between recovery and speedy recovery with a speedy transition towards sustainability. We do believe that the European Green Deal agenda can significantly increase the time that is needed, to recover from this crisis. So we are certainly not putting aside the sustainability consideration. Sustainable finance will not be put aside. On the contrary, in our policy agenda, sustainable finance will be a major lever that will accelerate this recovery. So for that reason, the European Commission and the European Union, you have seen that there is a very comprehensive package of measures that member states and the European Union are putting in place. And the role of sustainable finance in that context has only increased. We also are changing our own internal organizational structures. I mean, we are, again, paying particular attention to the use of taxonomy, to the use of green bond standard by the public sector. You have seen that there have been several declarations at the political level confirming that EU taxonomy will guide investments for the benefit of the European recovery. And we are now finding ways how to do that. Now, I will just use the last 2 minutes. Sean?
Martin, I'm going to drill back further a little later into the resilience and recovery, the just transitions funds, because this is a huge agenda with massive global implications for currency, for bond markets, and so on. What I'd like to do, if I can, is to just get you to pause for a minute and then come back. We're going to go to the governor because he has to jump off in a minute, and then we'll come back, if that's okay.
Absolutely, fine with me. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Governor, thank you for being able to join us. You've got a huge job in Lagos, figuring out how to take your city forward into a sustainable universe. Tell us a little bit about challenges and more to the point, your vision.
Well, thank you very much, Sean. And I want to thank you for inviting me.
You're very faint, Governor. You need to be closer to the microphone, I think.
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me better now?
Can't hear you at all, I'm afraid. Okay.
I can hear you.
You can hear me?
I can hear the governor too.
You might need someone in your office to help you out there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can go.
Thank you very much. Well, so I've listened patiently with listening to Fiona and Martin, and I want to thank you, Sen, for inviting me. You know, so I have a completely different perspective, you know, to the conversation now. Like you said, I sit, you know, squarely on the governance side, right? And you know, Lagos, like you've described, it's not only.
So, go ahead.
Can you hear?
Go ahead, Governor.
Thank you. I'm sure Fiona, Martin, you can hear me.
We can.
Yeah, they can hear me. It's only Sen. I don't know why. Okay.
We're hearing you well now.
Thank you very much. You know, so that's the new normal now. That's the reality of where we found ourselves after COVID, right? So like I said, I'm taking it from a very fairly different perspective, listening to Martin and Fiona. And Fiona, thank you very much for the great work you're doing. You know, I'm just hoping that at the end of this conversation, you begin to look more around Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. You know, Lagos, given the demography, it's the fifth largest economy in Africa, right? It's behind South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, and Nigeria itself. So if we were to be a country, it will be the fifth, right? So, but in terms of the land mass, it represents less than 0.5% of the total land mass of the country. So it's like a small dot like Singapore, you know, where Lagos sits with over 22 million, you know, population, you know, and given that small little space, it pretends that it will have a whole lot of social economic challenges, you know, from the vehicular traffic that moves on a daily basis to the amount of the tons of over 13,000, you know, waste that we generate, you know, every day, to challenges around no enough sufficient power to lit up the entire city, to also, I mean, challenges around, you know, having to move, you know, that population on a sustainable basis, either even in education, in health, given the challenges of COVID-19, you know, that has ravaged the whole world in the last 6-7 months. So Lagos, you know, pretty much sits, you know, in that whole, you know, pressure pot, you know, it's like on a pressure burner, given that huge population, you know, that it has. But it also has its opportunity. It still controls about 60%, you know, of the commercial activity of the country. It controls, you know, about 65% of international travel of the country. And interestingly, you know, 60-65% of that population are ages between under 35. So you have this huge population, and you have this huge demography around, a future's growth, given the demography of the very youthful population that it has. So in all of the contraptions around the challenges that face the city, there's still an enormous opportunity, that we need to also build, not even now, for the future that we see. So when we came into government about a year ago, a year and a month and a half, we came with a very robust, economic agenda, right, which we tagged, as project teams, which is spelled THEMES. The first T in our agenda is how do we resolve traffic management and transportation, right? So if you're in a city where about 4 or 5 million people need to move from one part of the city to another and using only vehicular movement, then you know that there has to be a great opportunity for rail transportation that we're trying to build now, and water transportation, because Lagos in itself, 1/3 of it is surrounded by water. It's below the sea level, like you have in Netherlands, in Amsterdam, is also below the sea level, right? So traffic management and transportation becomes a huge thing that we're looking at, and we're building 2 rail corridors right now. The first option was to bring a diesel engine, but we said no. We certainly have to go for electric, engine, and we need to also build power plants that will even compete with insufficient electricity that is not meeting the whole city. So moving from traffic and transportation, which is very, very huge for us, is also to look at, our health challenges, and our environment. Like I said, we have 14,000 metric tons of waste that we generate on a daily basis. We're looking for opportunities to convert those wastes to energy, to fertilizer, to whatever it's organic waste that we can convert, and we're teaching our people, around ensuring that waste sorting becomes part of their life, so that it becomes a lot easier for us to do waste sorting, and be able to convert those waste. Health is certainly a challenge. COVID-19 has explained to all of us in the country that we need to scale up our health infrastructure, right? I've got, in Lagos, for example, I've got 4,500 doctors in the UK alone. I've got another 7,000 doctors in the US that have grown out of universities in Nigeria, right? But because of the level of the infrastructure that we have, they all are abroad, needed to hack a living. But COVID-19 has also given us that opportunity to be able to have telemedicine with them during this pandemic, open up, internet where they can diagnose and they can speak to us. And also we've seen an opportunity where we need to scale up, our infrastructure on the health side. On technology, which is the next E, in our team's agenda, education and technology. How do we take our children, that huge population that I said is about 65 to 70%, how do we ensure that they become real leaders for tomorrow? We're currently developing a 6,000 metropolitan fiber lane optics in the city of Lagos. So we want to have fiber internet in every school. We've got over 2,000 of those schools, more than the country of Ghana that we have in Lagos. We're doing, fiber connectivity in those schools. We're doing fiber connectivity in hospitals and in all government institutions. So that is some capability that we need to develop, and be able to reach our people very, very quickly. Then we said that we need to make Lagos a real resilient 21st century economy. How do we need to do that, right? We need to continue to up our skills in infrastructure, roads, housing, various movements that can make life a lot more resilient and a lot more sustainable, for the city. Everybody knows Nigeria as an entertainment hub for Africa. After Nollywood, after Bollywood after Hollywood and Bollywood is Nollywood, which 70% of it actually sits in Lagos, right? So for us, that also becomes one of the economic agenda that we need to fix. And lastly, security is such an important component of our deliverables. Because of all of the issues around security in the whole country, we couldn't allow, the center that where all the economic nerve system works to make it, a secondary component. So security is important for us. And finally, good governance. We want a government, that is accountable, that is transparent, and that can hold itself up, as compared to any economy in the world. So for me, you know, we see Lagos as a melting point of great opportunity, you know, in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, you know, not only with the number of population that it has, not only with the potentials of economic that it sits in as a country, you know, but also because of the future of the population that we see and that demography of that population. You know, we have over 65% of our population under 35. So this is a huge population that is raring to go. And I'm sure you know that Lagos also is a technological hub, you know, for Africa. 2-3 years ago, it used to be Cape Town, but we've since, you know, taken over with the amount and level of direct investment that we have in SMEs and small startups, in telecoms, you know, and in internet-related businesses. So I mean, in some sense, you know, I listened to what Fiona said, you know, and I listened to what Martin had said, you know, using, you know, the European Commission and all of it. But what I'm saying is, in all of that contraptions, you know, COVID, internet connectivity has given Africa that opportunity, especially sub-Saharan Africa, that opportunity where we do not need to run very fast and leave us behind. We all need to stand toe to toe and look at where can we deploy this opportunity. You know, for us, you know, taking the lead around green bond, it's not just a way of life for us. We see it as a new transition. We see it as a new way where, you know, we see it as a new way where we can begin to build the future cities. We can begin to build sustainable finance, you know, for the guys that are coming behind us. And we want to stand toe to toe, you know, as much as possible with Europe, with America, you know, and other parts of the world. And so I'm using this platform, for example, to say that, you know, whilst we might have our issue challenges, we know that there's a right market in Lagos. There's a right market that we can sit with, right? And where the conference about a month ago, where Sin and his teams, you know, were talking to, you know, you know, has a real sustainable, resilient city, you know, using green bond as a tool where it can use either in environmental challenges, in transportation challenges, in infrastructure challenges, in environmental challenges. So it were available. We're ready, you know, to mix whatever, you know, policies or whatever, you know, documents that Fiona and her team will be sending on to us. And this is where it can happen. You know, the center of the entire sub-Saharan sits in this city. And we know that the growth potential is enormous, right? That's why I'm excited that Sen has given me this opportunity to just share one or two, you know, of our own thought process with you. So I will yield it back to Sen, and I'll be willing to take questions if any. Thank you very much.
Sean, you're on mute.
You're mute.
We are really having some issues here. And the interpreter's going crazy again too.
Chinese interpreter, can you please put yourself on mute because your voice is coming.
We've got to laugh, Governor, as we learn how to use this. What we clearly need is some IT engineers from Lagos helping us out. We'll get you to put us in touch. But you have a huge job to do in Lagos. It's fantastic to hear that you're considering green bonds, and that's part of the agenda going forward. I guess for Fiona's perspective and her members, there's now an interesting question about how we engage with an economy that's generally been off limits for international investors thanks to Naira volatility. And from the European Commission's point of view, and perhaps this is a question for DG DevCo, how do we actually support that? 70% of capital expenditure that we have to do in the next 30 years is in emerging markets, not in the developed markets. The capital sits in rich countries. So this bridge between Lagos and Brussels is a really critical thing that we have to build to make our future sustainable. So I'm just going to ask for Martin any questions of the Governor before we lose him from your perspective, because I want to set up a meeting between DG DevCo and the Governor as soon as possible, given those statements.
No, Sean, I mean, I was very happy to hear, I mean, what the Governor had to say. I mean, just want to confirm that from our side, we are putting a lot of to making sure that the agenda that we set out in the European Union is not only for the European Union, but is really very relevant also for emerging markets and developing countries. And the international dimension of our work really is getting much more prominence, and we will say much more about this later this year when we present a new strategy. I would like to maybe ask the governor, since you asked me, and invited me to ask the governor, where the European Union, can build these bridges better, because so far we have made some attempts, but obviously there is always something more that the European Union can do. And I would like to ask him, where would he see, some space for improvements on our side? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Martin. Right, you have a very vibrant office in Nigeria. I dare say you have a very active European Commissioner who, knows Lagos and knows us very, very well, right? I met with him sometime last year. So what I see is, a synergy that we can take forward even outside of this meeting, right? Especially around, environmental challenges, transportation challenges, and the city, he's sophisticated enough to understand and appreciate that sometimes some of these things will come at a cost. Right, so for us, it's not about a market that is not deep. It's actually very deep. The financial market in Nigeria, for example, it's the biggest outside of South Africa, it's the biggest in Africa, right? And we have a whole lot of Nigerian. Lagos is their capital, right? A whole lot of them are the ones controlling both the East African market, the West African market, and some part of also Southern African market. So the templates, around financial services is very, very deep here. We just now need to have, some sense around regulation and ensuring that what is the mix of the financing component that is available. And I'm saying that our government will be willing to even, pass legislation if it comes to that can make, climate bonds, green bonds part of our deliverables, even if we need to have stronger regulations, so that issues around, sustainability, issues, around whatever it is that we need to cross, it's new for us, but we're willing to learn the rope very, very fast and bring up regulations that can make it work both for our, international investors, and I'm saying that we have a market that is ripe, the city, the diversity that we have, given the age population, they understand what needs to be done and they're willing for it.
Thank you.
You're mute again. Sen.
Sean, you're still on mute.
No, you need to unmute. Thank you.
I tell you, I'm going to go mad at this. Governor, thank you for joining us today. It's been a privilege to have you. I know you have to go to another meeting. So we'll now move on to Japan. We have Hiromichi Mizuno with us, who has had I have to say he's done some fantastic things in his time as CIO of the Japan GPIF, which is the world's largest pension fund, and is now today representing the Ministry of Economic Trade and Industry, which is the ministry that guided Japan's development in the 60s and 70s. It is the archetypal activist industrial ministry, which is exactly what we need to transform our economies going forward. Whether he's going to talk about that, I don't know, but Hiro, over to you. We're having trouble with audio.
I'll ask you to unmute yourself. Let's see if that works.
It's not working.
Okay. Hiro, we're having trouble hearing you, I'm afraid.
Hiromichi, we are sending you another link, okay, so you can rejoin the session.
Hiro, we'll have to come back to you in a minute. And then we'll go to Valvanera next. And then once we've got audio confirmed, we'll come back to you. Zoom, folks, is supposed to be fantastic. It has been fantastic, but we've clearly still got some challenges to make it the perfect conference media. So thank you for your persistence. Valvanera, thank you for joining us. Spain has been very ambitious in its climate goals. We're keen to hear about how this is actually working in a very challenging economic environment, deeply challenging, but also Spain's role in the European Commission. You've been an activist voice supporting the EU Action Plan and other matters. I'm curious to see your perspective on that. Please.
Thank you very much, and a special regards for Vice President Rivera, that is not able to be here today, but is following us, is following and inspiring us. Thank you for the invitation to share our views on this panel on such a critical topic, leadership. And as you said, Sean, leadership while we are confronting a deep social, environmental, and economic crisis, and governments have the responsibility to work urgently on all of them. My first comment will be that for the government of Spain, it is clear that the answer to the three crises should be the same and consistent. We need to recover better by boldly facing the need for a more resilient world, resilient in a broadly sense, resilient from the social perspective, from the economic, and from the environmental perspective. So the recovery offers a new opportunity to all of us to do things in the right way. We need to be reliable to our citizens in order to get the economy again on go, and we also need to be reliable to our private sector and to our investors. So in that sense, the opportunity is huge, and we need to be consistent with our international and European commitments. So I think that from our perspective, the governments right now have a key role to play, but in a new environment and in a new paradigm. So we need to work in a different mood. We need to get engaged with all the different stakeholders, because the urgency of the action, you know, it's very demanding. So we need to identify political priorities. I think that this is key. Political priorities that really are good for the environment and for the people, while discriminating against those with negative impacts is key right now. Here, the taxonomy, the work that the European Commission is putting in place will be very, very helpful, and it has already defined clearly what transition is. The question will be, you know, in the next phase of the implementation, when we walk the talk, if it is sufficient. So we need to work on probably on broadly, you know, aspects or in different aspects of this taxonomy. But I think that we have the work here, and we know exactly, you know, what is good and what is negative for our countries and for our society. In line with this first comment, we cannot replicate the mistakes of the past when we focus on the national responses on brown investments. I think that this lesson, you know, it's very worth right now in the period now we are facing. We need to secure future investments, and that is to avoid stranded assets to the decisions that we are taking to respond to the sanitary crisis of the COVID. And as a matter of principle, climate and environmental protection need to be put up front, through a transformational approach to action in all the sectors. It's a multi-criteria approach from the political aspect, but also, you know, a multi-criteria approach, getting out of silos, and merge all the co-benefits of the different policies. So we have an important role to play in Spain, we have an important role to play in Japan, and we have an important role to play in all the countries. So three key dimensions are absolutely critical, I think, for the time being. Giving a clear direction of travel, you know, governments have the opportunity and have the responsibility to give clear political signals that stimulates action. Accelerating clean energy and infrastructure frameworks and rising climate ambition will be as part of our responsibility, so we cannot look at other issues. We need to right now, you know, prioritize that, giving clear direction of travel and political signals. We are in the year in which Paris asked for an update of the NDCs in line with the 1.5 goal. And Europe is working, as Martin said, in the impact assessment to set an ambitious target. We in Spain are of the position to support, at least a 55% goal for Europe by 2030. And this is because not only of the environmental positive aspect that will bring us, it's also about social and economic co-benefits. If we think about safe of energy imports, or if we think about the competitiveness of our all industries or new value change for our industries, this goal, will really be the motor to accelerate, the investments and to accelerate the new industry that we need in Europe. Setting also accompanying policies that will be also a work to do within all the administration, the national ones and also the local ones, alongside with fiscal stimulus package to provide the micro signals will be also important to incentivize private sector investment and spending. And as we said at the beginning, joining forces with the private sector and within also the business sector, will be crucial. We are especially focused this year or the last year in the financial sector because it's the key enabler for the transition. I think that government level need to promote policies that shift public but also private finance flows from carbon intensive towards low carbon and resilient policies. That is also one of the key pillars of our policy right now. I'm talking about green budgeting, sovereign green bonds that we are working on that in Spain, about carbon pricing, about opening the scope of the ETS and phasing out fossil fuel subsidies. All are the ingredients of the good receipt for the financial sector. And also about financial regulation, that is also important in all government policies. We need to mainstream climate in portfolios and ensure that we are ready to disclosure, but also to manage climate-related risk, and about economy and fiscal policies to facilitate the promotion of climate neutrality. So what Fiona mentioned is not only about disclosure, it's also about implementation, and be part of the solution. So with all these initial comments, Spain is also doing its part. We have been working very, very tough the last two years. There is an enormous challenge, and we try to turn it into a big opportunity for our country. So the first thing that we really achieve, and I think that is important to share with you, is that now this agenda, the agenda for the ecological transition, it's a state agenda. It's not only, an agenda of the Ministry of the Environment, it's an agenda of all the governments. So it's not part of the one silo of our policies, it's part of the huge political agenda that we are pushing right now to recover better and to preparing us for the future. It's not only empty words, we have several legal tools, and we have working hard, to push at international level, at European level, the big ambition as possible, because as I said at the beginning, we think that it will bring a lot of co-benefits. So the last 2 years, we have a comprehensive exercise, very, very open and very consultative with the society to make sustainable as a pillar of all the political agenda of the government. Examples that would help, in order to visualize, the efforts that we have already achieved are many legal issues, but the main important ones, we have set an institutional framework through the Climate Change and Energy Transition Law. It's important to remark that the law raises climate targets and forces the investors to divest from fossil fuels. There are two important messages there. So the new law endorses concrete quantitative goals by 2030 that are in line with the 55% that we are pushing up in Brussels. And it also, endorsed the climate neutrality by 20, or as far as possible, by 2050, and a 1% renewable electricity system. So two important goals that will inspire and will focus the rest of the policies. It also guides action to integrate climate ambition into policy instruments. That means that when the different ministries start to propose new legislation, have to integrate the climate change ingredient in all of them. So that is an important step, you know, in our government also. New obligations to ensure that our financial and investor sector are prepared to participate in the sustainable international markets by demanding risk analysis for companies to issue an annual report assessing the financial impact of the risks associated with climate change, very similar to what France did, you know, in the law 3 years ago, providing also to the supervisions, the Bank of Spain and the rest of the stakeholders in Spain, a report on the assessment of the risk to the Spanish financial system arising from climate change, and most important, apply or make mandatory a climate goal to all these companies. We will like to incentivize them, but we also think that it's time for them to analyze and to define, you know, a climate goal in line with the 1.5 degrees. So
you're asking corporations to actually define climate goals going forward?
Yeah, we need to work with them, and we need to set, you know, all the sectoral trajectories that will come in the national integrated plan that we have already launched also and approved. So
this is transition.
This is transition. We need to land the law into the plans, and we have the national integrated energy and climate plan, as Martin asked to us, and we also have the national adaptation plan. So there we have all the sectoral trajectories to a decarbonized country by 2050. That means that we have a map for all the investment, and we are trying to be very consistent with the Paris Agreement. We are working right now in a plan to integrate the taxonomy, not only to say that we are working with these ideas in order to say that all the investment and all the sectoral trajectories that we have already put on the legal framework, you know, are aligned with the green taxonomy. And here, you know, comes, you know, a big question. When we analyze what is green, what is transition, and what is enable, there are things that are very clear and we have no doubts, and there are other investments that we will be needed in this decade, and that will be designed, you know, in a way that don't make an investment very, very unsustainable in the future, and it's not easy at all. So that's what I think.
Valvanera.
And it's good to have all these tools to follow.
We'll pick up that question. I now want to cut to Hiro, who hopefully his audio is working now from a Japanese, but I'm going to say, Martin, you must be thrilled with what you're hearing from Spain in terms of the action plan. We'll come back to his comments after Hiro. Hiro, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Can you now?
I think we're a go.
All right, great. Thanks, Sean. Can you hear me now?
Yes, at last.
Good. Great, finally, thanks. Well, first of all, congratulations for that this big success. I mean, gathering all the financial players and also the government policy makers into this event. This is a great achievement of your initiative, and I think I always say, like, financial industry and the investor community have to be a bit more creative and innovative. And so looking at the of your project, like a transition, the bond principle, is giving me a sort of a sense of hope that that we can be we'll be able to address these issues by using financial innovative financial skills. So before talking about the government leadership, which is the title of this session, I just need to talk about the government law from my previous role viewpoint, because I used to manage Japanese public pension funds, and we are on the top of the investment chain, and so we try to affect the way asset managers run, the GPIF portfolio, and we try to bring in the others, the stakeholders and service providers to really align the investment, long-term investment strategy with the, like a Paris Agreement. And many cases, I found it's really difficult to totally align the our investment activities because the basically all the actors and actresses in capital market and financial industries are very well regulated. So I'm more hopeful that just by exercising commercial judgment and just by exercising investment, the common sense will end up leading, the asset owners and asset management industry and also the financial institutions to push their business and portfolio into the direction of the sustainability. In other words, aligned with the Paris Agreement. But many cases, we stuck with the lack of the global guideline or the domestic government's guidance on the some of the issues. And I probably don't need to talk about the the U.S. Department of Labor again challenging the fiduciary of a pension manager to even consider an issue as their the asset management business. So it's been really difficult for the the private sector play will shift their portfolio or their finance activities aligned with the Paris Agreement without the support from the local and the global policy maker. So after I stepped down from GPIF, I decided to accept the offer to become special advisor to Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, and particularly focusing on green innovation and the TCFD promotion. I see Martin's face, but I don't know whether people are actually hearing me.
Hearing you fine, Hiro.
Good. So so I just became the special advisor to the ministry, believing in we definitely need to have the collaboration between the policymakers and also the private sector actors and actresses who effectively control the global capital market. So I have to accept that so far quite often Japanese government policy, particularly around the coal, has been heavily criticized. And I accompanied the Minister Koizumi, our environment minister at the COP25, and he acknowledged we are criticized for that particular part of our climate policy. But at the same time, I mean, I have to say, the Japanese government, particularly like METI, took an initiative like 2 years ago. They set up the TCFD working group, and which resulted in a TCFD guidance. And as you probably be aware, at the time of at the time they started or established that study group, we probably had like 30 signatories to TCFD recommendation. Today we have, I think, 296 or 7. So pretty much the 300 signatories, Japanese corporates and the Japanese institutions now agreed to do TCFD reporting. And my previous, position, the GPIF, they are one of the first, the global asset owner who did the TCFD compliant reporting. So, we probably need to have the stick and the carrot to really move the system. And I think the people criticize Japan lacks the sticks, but we actually give a lot of carrots. So we take a very inclusive approach. It's soft, but the TCFD, for example, I understand my friend Mark Carney is now saying, they will make it mandatory, the disclosure requirement. And in Japan, when we started, we took advantage of the nature of TCFD being voluntary, because it wouldn't scare the corporate to try it out. Because it's the mandatory, they cannot make any misrepresentation, so they will be hesitant to do it. So sometimes, they are setting hurdle kind of high to involve as many players and many people as possible I think is a valid approach too. And then also, as far as the TCFD is concerned, we successfully, hosted the world first TCFD summit last year, and we would like to continue that. So, in October we are going to host the second TCFD, the summit on the web. So we will continue our effort to promote the ESG or climate disclosure, and before this session, you launched the transition bond principle, and I understand there's some disagreement or discussion on the how to clarify or how to specifically clarify the credible transition. But the Japanese government, METI, is now set up the working group to come up with the transition bond principle. So I think these efforts is bringing in more and more people on board. So I do appreciate, while I do appreciate like a EU taxonomy style, setting a hurdle very high, or your approach is to make, basically get rid of any risk of the greenwashing or those kind of things. But on the other hand, I always say having some maneuverability will actually invite more people to work for this agenda. So actually maybe it's a little bit inappropriate to just use the COVID-19 as an example, but at the beginning, Japan was very heavily criticized. We don't have the very mandatory and forceful measure to control people's behavior. But if we look back, we are probably relatively doing great in a way, with the sort of bringing more people to work together without really controlling them. So I think I just wanted to repeat, when I was at the GPIF, I really, almost desperate to get the policy maker to step in, because one example is that Fiona talked about the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, which I was invited, obviously, but I find it's really difficult while the government hasn't set the net zero target at that time. So it makes no sense, given the very big portfolios, well-diversified portfolio, we just cannot collect the company who committed to net zero to make up the $1 trillion portfolio, right? So we just need to have the government and everybody to support. The world is heading that direction. So on one hand, it's important to just make sure that each investment asset allocation decision will make it as green as possible, but at the same time, I always thought it doesn't make much sense to expect that the big asset owner like a GPIF can compose the portfolio with only green ingredients. So it's very important to make sure that we will, invite more people to push the agenda forward, and it's really important to bring the policy maker aligned with those efforts, because it doesn't make any sense for big public pension fund to commit to something which their government doesn't commit yet. So it is very important to have the government on board. The last things I just want to say is, we also, want to work with the entity like United Nations. I mean, obviously, PRI started as the affiliates of the UN, but the UN has been promoting the financing for the sustainable development. So starting at the very, the universal level like a UN and, the people like a European Commission or Japan and the Asia and the regional policymakers, the more they push the agenda forward, it will make the regulated industries and regulated player to be more aggressive in pursuing the same agenda. So I just wanted to say, like, we just need to push from all the different angles. And I think the Japan is trying to take a leadership on that, and appreciate also the European Commission's approach, which may be different, but it will push the system forward from the different angles.
Thanks, Hiro. There's no doubt that things have been changing in Japan. And I look back and I look at your term as the CIO of GPIF as one of the critical parts of that transition. And it's been interesting to see what Minister Koizumi has been doing over the last year with various initiatives out of his environment portfolio. So it is fantastic. Clearly there's work to be done. But I do note that Japan's been supporting the UNFCCC with the Recovery and Resilience Platform to garner ideas around the state. Now that's a bit of a segue for me into Martin, because I'm interested to hear about the recovery and resilience aspect of the EU plans now. Just one question to you. Any gossip about the Japanese government doing a green bond now that Germany's had such a fantastic debut?
Well, I mean, I have been, discussing that with the Ministry of Finance for the last 2 years. It's been the less interest shown from them, because under the current financial the environment, it's very easy to place the JGB anyway. But and also in the past, there's very few governments like the French issued a green bond. So not issuing a green bond was not the minority. But I always think, like, it's very difficult to give a direct reward to the issuer of green bond, but if we continue to build this market, it should result in the issuer who doesn't issue the green bond will be penalized in a way. So I think that's our common goal. So far,
absolutely.
Guarantee you that Japan will issue the green bond, but I continue to lobby on that as well. So, and I try to lobby the UK government as well. If they push the agenda forward at COP26, they should be the one to do it first.
Thank you, Hiro. Of course, Martin, one of the features of the Recovery and Resilience Funds is this bond issuance program, where not only does it talk about a green bond issuance program, but perhaps more importantly, a large AAA program out of the European Union in an area where there's been a lack of opportunities to invest, and it's going to be green. This is going to change global asset allocation. Reserve currencies concepts could be expanded. Tell us more about the Recovery and Resilience Fund and where it's up to.
Well, Sean, as you know, I mean, the package that the Commission adopted and now is subject to negotiations really entails a huge amount of money. It's, a couple of hundreds of billions of euro. And it's clear that, the bulk of this money will need to be invested, obviously, in the support of the European Green Deal and all the sustainability objectives that the European Union pursues. And for that reason, in the communication of the Commission that was published so far, we did make it very prominent and very clear that the taxonomy, will be the guiding tool for these investments. We now need to make sure again, how to make sure that not only in the Green Deal agenda is supported, but also how investments that normally would hamper meeting the European Green Deal would not materialize, so that we are really accelerating the shift from investments that are hurting the European Green Deal to investments that are supporting the Green Deal. And that's why all this money that has been now put into the system by the governments, by the member states, by the European Union, now basically providing a number of great opportunities for the private sector, because the alignment
Martin, excuse me, it's Mariana from Logistics. Your audio is a bit, it's not perfect anymore. Can you just double check your settings? It's breaking up a little.
Sure. I was just saying that obviously the recovery packages, the recovery packages that now have been adopted at the member states and European Union level provide a number of large-scale opportunities for the private sector, because they will indeed incentivize the private sector to be part of bigger projects.
So that's a really important, sorry, Martin, we're losing a little bit of audio quality for some reason, but that's actually a really important point. And I think going back to Fiona, and I want to ask Fiona's view about what's being said, what you said extraordinarily clearly is public money can't do what's required. It's going to be a collaboration between the Commission, member states, as Valvanera talked about, and investors and corporates for that matter, that's going to take this forward. And I think Hiro's saying that that's what Japan's been engineering as well, albeit in a slightly different framework based on how Japanese industry and government work together. And the governor seems to be wanting this as well. Fiona, this looks like a huge pipeline of investment opportunities for your members coming through. Am I right? Does that sound right?
I think that is right, but I do think, picking up on the different things that people said, Sean, it is about everything coming together. So Hiro talked about the fact that, well, as the largest pension fund in the world, they couldn't join in something like the Asset Owner Alliance because they didn't have the government settings, being a government pension fund, that set that direction, the 2050 agenda. And that made it more difficult. And I do think that we see that where governments have set a target and are then setting clear directions, it's making it easier for investors, and they're the ones who are getting involved because they understand where things are heading. Then you've got the pieces of the architecture that Martin also talked about the taxonomy, etc. So everything needs to come together. None of us can do it in isolation. As I said, though, with the Asset Owner Alliance, one of the clear pathways that we have, one of the clear pieces of work that we're doing is the financing part. So identifying we recognise that we're not going to get to net zero by just the things we don't invest in or by decarbonising. We also need to invest in the pathways for the future. We need to invest in the new technologies, the companies of the future, more than just green energy, many more things. And so with the investors then committing to net zero by 2050, we do need those pipelines. We do know that need those investments to be available. So it's the business, the investors, governments, regulators, that all need to be around the table together to make it all happen. Not one of us is going to make it happen on our own, but by working together, we can certainly speed it all up.
And that is the really key thing that we need to pursue in transition. It's not just a technical aspect, it's how we work together to deliver the transition going forward. Martin, you've got an action plan version 2 in the works. I know you're not allowed to tell us what's going to be in it. And I know it's got a couple of months before it comes out of the oven fully baked. But can we expect a significant increase in ambition as a result of an EU Action Plan version 2? Is that a fair thing for Fiona and I to hope for, and Valvanera?
Well, as long as I will be in the job, Sean, I think that you can certainly count on a very high ambition, and not only me, but also of the guidance, political guidance of the Executive Vice President Dombrovskis. Yes, I think that the ambition will need to increase. There are essentially 3 reasons why. The first one is, we have seen a lot of encouraging progress in the market, but simply the progress and the transition pace is not fast enough. It's simply not good enough. And, the project was started before we set the European Green Deal goals. So that's why we really need to now, think harder what to do in order to accelerate, the transition of the financial sector, but also how to facilitate the job of the financial sector to support the businesses. It's not only about greening finance, but it's also now more about financing green, because we have all those targets. The second reason is, again, we have to now work harder on the recovery, and I think that somebody mentioned very rightly the importance of resilience. We need to elaborate more on how the different risks and the crises that we are facing might interact. I mean, how these interactions of the different risks might create additional challenges not only for the financial sector but businesses as well. So we again need to really scale up the ambition of the project overall. We have consulted widely on the new ideas. We have received a massive response. We have received 650 responses that are calling for a higher ambition, and the expectations out there is pretty high. So I would like to thank all of you who have contributed to these deliberations, and you can expect a very substantive piece before the end of the year.
I have to say, Fiona, that is music to my ears. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
It just gives me hope. And I think one of the things that we need to be focusing on now is it's not only the delivery of the action, but we do need to ensure that we're sharing of our citizen and industry. There is hope that action is actually coming through working on it. And I think, Hiro, that's really the Japanese story, frankly, for me over the last 2 years. There's been a significant change, it looks like, from the outside. And TCFD is one of those, in terms of the engagement at government levels and the willingness to start taking significant action on this and to collaborate internationally. Is that a fair thing to say? We're into the final 9 minutes now, so think about your final comments going forward. But Hiro, is that a reasonable thing to say?
Yes, yes. I think that's fair comment. Sometimes the Japan hasn't really taken the kind of visible approach like Europe, but under the ground there are a lot of landslide actually happened over the last 2 to 3 years, and everything like even a months ago people thought impossible, now just getting more support, and which is happening more volatility, but it will continue to at the momentum. So I just read the Nikkei article yesterday. Like this year, almost like 300 Japanese companies are now disclosing volatility, like a climate-related risk. So and obviously, like given the 300, the support of the TCFD, they will do it in their own way, and they are trying to be, as said, the best example for the because the TCFD forum to exchange the best practice. So. It's just, I'm hopeful, but at the same time, I really think like, we need a both ends. The one people who set the very, very clear high ambition and the clear guidance, and the other people work on the ground. But if you look at how the Japan, became the sort of like, the joining the leadership of this, addressing this climate crisis just for the last 3 years is, it just gives me a hope, and we just wanted to invite as many probably developing countries who struggle with their own energy policy or those kind of we need to address like a fair the just transition, as well as we need to just achieve SDGs at the same time while we are addressing the the climate issues. So. There are a lot of things which is not simple, but I'm hopeful, and I will continue to push it. And everybody who are on this panel is pushing this agenda from different angle. Some people doing at the regional level, and somebody doing at the the more like a global level or domestic level, and in their own organization. So just to wrap up my comments, I mean, I think the Japan is showing some hope that we can actually. Continue to change, and that we probably able to speed up the process of change as faster than people think.
And Hiro, one of the things we're very keen on in a European perspective is deepening our collaboration with Japan on all of these issues, especially around the sustainable finance agenda. So I'm hoping, and I'm speaking here merely as a member of the critical expert group now, not as part of the Commission staff, but I'm hoping that over the next year, the next 6 months a year, we can find a lot more ways to collaborate on especially industrial transitions in the manufacturing sector, in which Japan is such a global leader, how we shift to low carbon. Martin, have I stepped out of turn? Is that okay to say that?
It's absolutely fine, Sean. I mean, how can I convince you ever? I mean,
okay. I'll go to Valvanera. You've heard a lot of different perspectives, and thank you for the Spanish. What's your feeling about this going forward? Any comments, any reflections from you about the next stage of how we transition economies as a result of today's conversation?
Thank you very much. It's so interesting. I think that the next stage should be try not to spend the money, but to invest it in transition to a decarbonized world. And that means that we need to get, you know, all the people on board. I think that the last year we have seen an involvement of the private sector as never in fighting against climate change and all the environmental policies, but we need to walk the talk. I think that all investors, all companies already have in their own agenda the need for the transition, and that it will be competitiveness for them, and so on and so on. But now we really need to change the boat to the right direction, and that means that we need new partnerships and collaboration, and climate bonds will be one of the enablers. And we are key on you and on the green finance, and I think that it's a very, very nice challenge. And I'm saying from the optimisms, not from the negativisms. I think that we are on time to do things right, and that's the opportunity we have in front.
Martin.
Thank you, Sean. Well, I will start with a maybe brief message, and that is, I mean, that currently the financial sector is financing a climate scenario of approximately 3 to 5 degrees, I mean, depending on the region. Now, our ambition, since we are talking about transition, is that in 5 years' time, especially at the end of this Commission's mandate, you know, the situation will be tangibly better. For the time being, unlike it might seem, I mean, we have not yet forced the financial sector to use all these tools like taxonomy, the green bond standard. We have legislated so far on the transparency, to what extent these tools have been used. Now, the big question that we have now, you know, how successful we all will be in the use of those critical tools and frameworks. And we are really now in the hands of the industry, because we are not yet legislating any requirement, you know, you have to have at least 50% of your assets invested in taxonomy compliant activity. So we are really in the hands of the sector, but at the same time, we would like to see the progress. So the more progress we see and the better framework we have to monitor this progress of the transition, maybe the less brutal and the less radical we will have to be as regulators. So my plea to everyone is really to reflect very hard, you know, what is the transition plan of every company, especially bigger companies, not only financial sector, but also the businesses, I mean, on how they will transition towards the 2030 and 2050 targets, so that we can avoid, you know, much more radical regulatory responses over time, because they usually tend to be the most costly solutions. So again, that's maybe the message from my side. We will try to be very measured. Our action plans and our initiatives are not only about legislation, but it's a function of the progress that we will observe over time. Thank you.
Fiona.
Okay, well, I feel when the COVID-19 crisis first happened, I cannot tell you how many people said to me, that's it for climate and sustainability is off the agenda. Nothing could end up being further from the truth. In actual fact, I think those people who didn't already understand all the things that we've already been working on for many, many years finally became to understand the interconnectedness of issues. That if you're going to have a healthy economy, to underpin that, you need healthy people and a healthy planet. So the moment to drive sustainability issues forward is now. I'm sitting here in London, and Churchill said, you know, that we should never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think we have to make sure that we don't let a good crisis go to waste, and that we do drive this forward. I also think that we've got an opportunity, because what does every government, every country in the world need to do over the next 5 to 10 years? It needs to create jobs. And we can create the green jobs of the future that we need. There's going to be far more jobs in the green economy, and we can stimulate economies at the same time as creating opportunities. And jobs is the important thing to me. I think going forward that governments need to do, we need to be part of creating those jobs. We need to, people mention the just transition. I think this is extremely important as well. So I will just finish by saying that we need to leave no one behind, but we all need to bring government, business and regulators and investors together to really not waste this crisis.
Fantastic final remarks. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you for joining us today at this Climate Bonds Green Transitions Conference. There is no doubt the future has to be about transition and rapid transition at that as well. It has been, I have to say, incredibly heartening to your comments and your prognosis. We cannot do this without governments, investors and corporations working together. The challenge is to bring everyone together, bang heads together if necessary, or do it through quiet corridors if that works. The main thing is working in lockstep has to be the way we go forward. Otherwise, there is no sustainable future for our children. Thank you for joining us today, everyone. Thanks to Martin, Fiona, Valvanera, Hiro, and the Governor who had to leave earlier. In 30 minutes, we'll start the last session of the day. Each day, 1 hour at the end, is to discuss what are the implications for bond markets. Is this going to work? What's the future look like? So our investors, issuers, buy side, sell side, and others will be grappling with what we've said in 30 minutes time. Thank you everyone for joining us. Look forward to achieving that future that we know we all need.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you.